Well, good morning or good afternoon or even good evening. Thank you all for joining us today. Our webinar today is how to train faster and better with microlearning. My name is Jeff Toister, and I'm going to be sharing some framework with you around what is microlearning and how to do it. And with me, I've got Bryan Naas, Director of Sales Enablement at Lessonly. Bryan, how are you doing today?
Hey, Jeff, I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on. I'm really excited about today.
Well, I'm pretty excited to have you as well. And I think we're going to have an interesting conversation. And one thing I want to give just kind of a quick update before we dive into it. If you have questions, we're going to try to make this as interactive as possible. Lori's already jumping in, saying hello. If you can navigate to the little chat screen, looks like a little chat bubble, you'll see the ability there to enter questions for us. And if there's one that's super relevant to what we're talking about at the moment, we might pause and answer it. And we're also going to save some time at the end to be able to address your questions. And then look at that. Both of our contact information is on that first slide there. So if you want to continue the conversation or there's something that we just didn't get to, then you can email Bryan or myself or connect with us on Twitter. We'll love to have the conversation keep going there. So I'm going to cover some of the nerd side of things and try to make things fun for you. That CPLP next to my name, it stands for Certified Professional in Learning and Performance, which basically means I'm a training nerd. It's something I care passionately about, and I'm always interested in how people learn. And so today, we're going to talk about microlearning. I want to start with a definition just to get us on the same page. Just so you're aware of when we talk about microlearning today, this is what we mean. And if you look at that definition, I think there's a few things that really stand out for me. One is it's a process, but it's a process of delivering bite-sized content. And so if you think about bite-sized, it might be very, very small compared to, let's say, a 2-hour class, a 2-day class, a 2-week class, right? That certainly wouldn't be microlearning. All right. Hang on just a sec, Bryan. I've got one person saying I'm having some technical issues, and the answer that I always have for people when they're having technical issues is, unfortunately, try another browser if they're using Safari. So we'll pause. All right.
No worries at all.
What's that?
No worries at all. Lori, you've been engaging in there. Can you hear us? Can you confirm that you can hear us, and so we can maybe isolate if that's an issue just for Jeremy?
That's a smart idea. That's the chat. That's the chat function. And there is, when you ask that question, Bryan, there is a slight delay from when you ask it until Lori hears it, and then Lori can hear us fine. Okay, great. Thank you, Lori. So hopefully that works for you, Jeremy. Now we'll go back to the definition. The other key, besides bite-sized, is you apply the knowledge immediately versus I learned something and then 3 weeks later I get to apply it. So it's small chunks of learning that you can apply immediately. And I'll give you a quick example. This is a picture of my keyboard here. It's a solar keyboard. And wouldn't you know the battery, even on a solar powered keyboard, can go out every now and then. Now, if I want to replace the battery on my keyboard, I did what I think most of us probably would do. I go online and I find a short YouTube video on how to replace the battery on this keyboard. It's bite-sized. It's 2 or 3 minute video. It's something I can watch all at once. And it's immediately useful. As soon as I'm watching that video, I now know how to replace that battery. That takes a little bit of extra skill. Think about this in context versus what we sometimes do for other types of learning, where someone has a small learning need and we send them to a day-long training class. Now, in this context, it would be ridiculous to go to a day-long class on solar-powered keyboard repair just to replace the battery. I mean, I might as well buy a new keyboard at that point when we think about the time and money involved. But a 2 to 3 minute YouTube video, yeah, I can handle that. And instantly, I know how to replace my keyboard battery. So that's an example of micro learning in a very specific context. And I imagine a lot of you have done microlearning before. So I want to ask you a poll question. Let's see if I can pull this up here. And the question is, are you currently using microlearning? And I should give you a caveat. Are you currently using it in your business? I think all of us probably have done the YouTube example in our personal lives. Are you using it at work in some way? So if you can navigate to the little poll section, hopefully you're seeing that on your, oh, sorry. I'm waiting for you to answer the poll and I hadn't published it yet. Okay, now you're seeing it. User errors definitely happen here. All right, so we're gonna give you a few seconds to respond. Bryan, are you using microlearning?
Absolutely, we are every day, and it's something I believe in very much, and not only personal, but also at lessonly.
Nice, and I know you're going to share some examples, some very specific examples with us in a little bit, which is pretty cool. All right, I'm about to close the poll, but the results are saying this is nice. I mean, a third of us, 67%, are saying, yeah, we're using it right now, and two-thirds of us are saying we're using it. 1/3 is saying no, but I imagine that's why you're on the webinar today. Okay, we're going to close out the poll. Thank you for participating in that. So I want to give you another example of some of the adult learning behind this. And I want you to think back to high school. For some of us, myself included, that was a long time ago. For other of us, maybe it wasn't so long, maybe a bit more recent. But I want you to see if you can remember your high school locker combination. If you can, say it out loud or write it down. And I will tell you that when I was in high school, like many of you, I could open my locker in seconds. I didn't even think about it. Just twist, 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 open, done. I'm on my way. If you put me in front of that same locker today and told me that the combination was the same, I would not be able to open it. So I want you to think about whether or not you could open your high school locker right now. Most of us would say no. I'd say when I ask this question to people, maybe 1% say, yeah, I still remember the combination, but that's highly unusual. So why is that? Well, there's a few keys that are important to us memorizing information like that locker combination. And when we talk about memory, I really mean here being able to access that information very quickly. So one key is how relevant is that information to work you're doing? And we've all had this when you go to a workshop or a class and you get some brilliant information, you write all these notes and you go back to work and you realize, as cool as that stuff was, I don't have any place to use it right now. Now with the locker combination, it was relevant. You needed that combination to get in, to get your books. And so it was highly relevant to you. But today it's not relevant at all because you're not in high school, I'm assuming for all of us. So you don't need that information any longer. Now, the next one that I think is important is complexity. How complex is the information? A high school locker combination, it's 3 numbers. And for most of us, there was a very familiar pattern in terms of how we input those numbers. So not complex at all. That makes it a lot easier to memorize. If, on the other hand, it was a highly technical procedure and there was 27 steps and it was very, very intricate, then memorizing it really quickly might be very difficult. We might need a different device or tool to kind of walk us through that. And then the last piece is what we call spaced repetition. What this is simply, how often do you repeat this skill or repeatedly access this knowledge? You knew how to open your locker in high school because you probably used and accessed that information multiple times a day, 5 days a week for perhaps 6 months or longer. So think about that repetition. You're using it over and over and over again. But you're not using it all now, which is probably why it's, again, faded from memory. And if you really remember, think about like I'll change it to more of a workplace context. Think about like a password or a login procedure that you use in maybe a computer at work. The first time or two, you may have needed to go back to your notes and go, oh, how do I do this? But after using it a few times on a daily basis, you no longer need to refer to anything. So when we think about these three things, this is where I think microlearning comes into play. When information is highly relevant, it's not very complex, and it's information that we're going to be able to access over and over and over again. We're probably going to be able to memorize that. On the other hand, replacing a little battery on my keyboard, I'm going to use that once, and I'm not going to be able to memorize that. And so that's where I need something like a short video that helps me do that, and then I can go on about my day. So let's put this into a learning context. I had a client where they had a security procedure. They had an intercom to get into their small office like this one. You push the button, you could see the person, and there was a procedure that people needed to follow to be able to let people in. Now, the receptionist knew the procedure because they used it on a regular basis. It wasn't very complex, and it was highly relevant. The backup receptionist, same deal, knew the procedure because it was highly relevant. They used it regularly, and again, it wasn't very complex. But what happened was when the receptionist went out, maybe it was out sick or took a day off, and then the backup receptionist maybe had to go to lunch or take a break, then it was kind of all hands on deck. And they had this big challenge. How do we get people to memorize the security procedure? And we tried all kinds of things, and people just weren't following it. So I'm curious, I'm going to launch another poll here, and because this was certainly something that we were working on, or I guess this was the challenge for this team, knowing that people had to access this information, but not very often. How would you choose to train these office workers on the security procedure? So let's get your votes in here. We'll give you just a moment to do that. I'm curious, Bryan, what are you, maybe you'll tip your hand there. What would you do with this type of challenge?
Yeah, I can tell you, I'll tell you next exactly what we'll do. But I think, in short, getting the information to people when they need it, kind of contextual, as I think of that, is kind of the best way. So I'm curious what everybody else is thinking here. My default might even be going to a staff meeting, like, hey, here's the awareness, like, don't forget this is happening, and here's where you go get the information.
Yeah. Well, which we don't think of a staff meeting as being microlearning, but in a way it can be, right? If it's here's the information and go back to work and use it immediately, then that staff meeting is an example of microlearning. I will tell you, Bryan, that all of the examples here in our poll were things that my client had considered, with the exception of other. And it looks like 50% here are saying we're going to do other, and we suspect Jeff's about to tell us what that other is. And 50% says we'll email the procedure to everyone. Now, the poll, in fairness, doesn't give you the option of picking multiples. And often for something like this, I think, Bryan, you're right, we would maybe start in a staff meeting to promote awareness. I'm going to end the poll now. I'm going to share with you what we did, which is it's in the context of microlearning. So, all right, probably Lori's reading ahead. So if you're in the chat box and you see what Lori suggested, it was a 3-step procedure. And it's exactly what we did. We created a sign, we put it right next to the intercom. And so anybody in the office who was backing up the backup could quickly look at the procedure and follow it. One of the things we learned was that people wanted to follow the procedure. They understood the importance of security. The challenge was memorizing that information wasn't working because they didn't use it on a regular basis. They didn't have that spaced repetition. And most of the time, it wasn't relevant to their daily jobs. So it was tough for them to memorize it. And that's where the microlearning came in. So in this case, one simple sign that said 3-step security procedure, that was an example of microlearning. So really, really simple. All right, Bryan, I'm going to switch the slide here. I think you've got an example for us as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate it, Jeff. So we thought a lot about situations just like this that Jeff is talking about. And so to solve for situations like this, we created a Chrome extension so we could get contextual. So the Lessonly platform is embedded right within your Chrome extension. And when you get to a place where you may need to know a procedure and don't do it every day, we give you the option to consume that content, just like the laminated sheet that went right next to the phone with the security procedure. It can be consumed right in context. So our reps is actually a live example from that I screenshot from what our reps do. We use Southwest to book most of our flights travel. And so when a rep comes to the Southwest website, right in their Chrome browser, right next to them, you'll see a little pop-up that walks them through, hey, looks like you're booking with Southwest. Here's the procedure that we use, and here's some tips to booking your flight on Southwest. So it gives them that information, that micro learning, right when they need it, for something that they're only going to use maybe a few times a year, depending on the role, and maybe not more often if it's the sales team.
That's such an awesome example, Bryan, because it fits that definition of micro learning. It's bite-sized for sure. It's something you consume right then and there, and you use it immediately. And what I also like is, you gave the technology example. I gave the analog example, but they both fit. They're both micro learning. And
yeah, absolutely.
That's cool. All right. So I want to give you another example here around customer service skills, which is one of my passions and one of the areas where I focus. And I'll give you kind of the old and the new. So the old way, for me, years ago, if you asked me what I did, I would say I was a customer service trainer. And my core program consisted of 2 half-day workshops. And these were very interactive. They were very hands-on, and people really learned a lot. But there were certainly some challenges with that. One was just scheduling, getting people to schedule 2 half days. And we had the half day format versus 1 full day to get people a chance to go apply some skills at work. They had some assignments, et cetera. But still, it was difficult just logistically. And then what we noticed was that, people would usually gain a couple of things that they would use, and they would quickly forget the rest of it. And it's not that the training wasn't interactive or fun or they didn't like it. It's just, we go back to what do we remember? Well, if I ask you to remember, 25 pieces of content, let's face it, 2 might really bubble up to the top, and the rest of them, they're going to be hard to access, and then we quickly forget. So that was challenging. And then the other challenges we had on top of that were, well, sometimes people, what if you missed the half day of training? Then, well, how do we catch you up? Or what if after I came and did the training for this client, we hired some new people? So we had all kinds of different challenges with this. What we decided to do when we started looking at, how do we solve this issue was a couple of things. One was put all of my training on video. And so all of my training courses are now available on the lynda.com or LinkedIn Learning platform. And what's really cool about this is that even though some of my courses, so that same day-long course, 2 half days, now the runtime on that video, which is the same training, is 1.5 hours. But we went even further and we divided that video, that 1.5 hour video, into 3 to 5 minute segments. And so, for example, one of the clients I was working with, instead of trying to schedule all of this training, now you can have individuals at a time that works for each individual, take 1 3 to 5 minute segment, learn 1 new skill, and then go back to work. And that was kind of a key insight, that you don't consume the whole thing, even though all the content is available, you consume 1 portion of it. As soon as you go back to work and apply that skill, you've now made that 1.5 hour video actually micro learning, because you're only consuming 3 to 5 minutes at a time, focusing on 1 relevant specific skill at a time. Now then we took things to the next level, because one of my clients was saying, well, that's great, but I think we need some additional way to reinforce these skills. Once they learn and apply it, that's fantastic, but we need to remind them. So we got to go back to that spaced repetition. And let's face it, there's a lot of service skills that we learn that we say, oh, of course, it's common sense. But if we're honest with ourselves, we're not doing them on a regular basis. We're not doing them as much as we should. And so that led me to create an email. And I think probably many of you on the webinar today subscribe, called Customer Service Tip of the Week. And all it is, it's one email with one tip once per week. And the tip is probably something you already know or you've heard about. It's just a way to remind you, hey, don't forget to use this. And here's some context to help you use this a little bit better. And we found when we combined that bite-sized learning video approach with the weekly tips, all of a sudden performance went up. And so you can see here the result for this particular client, their customer satisfaction improved by 70%. And I think it improved so much because it wasn't just one thing, it wasn't just one class, it was multiple things that were constantly reinforcing the importance of customer service and how to deliver it. So I want to give you a chance, just in case you're not a subscriber already, you can subscribe to my weekly customer service tip of the week. And I'm just going to put it up on the screen under offers for just a moment. So here's what happens when you subscribe. One of the things I'm going to do, I've now put 52 of my most popular tips, more than 52 actually, in a book called Customer Service Tip of the Week. And if you subscribe to the newsletter, you'll get a free PDF of it. And the way you can use this book is you can use the book. There's a chapter on how to identify the challenges you're working on. So identify a specific challenge, identify some of the key skills, connect tips that will go with it. And then what I recommend is a weekly cadence. So once a week with your team, pick one thing you want to focus on. So for example, this week, it's very timely as we're in the holiday season, was practicing the art of handwritten notes. And so all we're saying is let's get back in the habit of writing a handwritten note to a customer every now and then, because that's going to make a big difference. And asking you to think about, how do you do that? How do you practice that? How do you enable your team? So just wanted to put that up there. And again, if you want to subscribe to that, you certainly can. If you're already a subscriber, thank you so much. I really appreciate that. And I think, Bryan, you've got another example, don't you?
Yeah, absolutely. So I absolutely love what you did by taking your videos, breaking them up, and then putting them out on lynda.com, LinkedIn Learning, and combining that with the reinforcement. That's something that again, we are passionate about, is kind of that spaced learning. So you can take bits of content that you have for your business. Could be videos like Jeff is using, could be other pieces of content, written content, images, and you can use what we call paths within the Lessonly platform to send that to your team in bursts of learning. So you can send them something at the beginning of 1 week, they have access to it, they consume the video. The next day, they get access to the reinforcement lesson. A week later, they get access to another video and another set of reinforcement. So we can space that learning, that micro learning out. And that's exactly what we do here. We put all of our reps through an onboarding program, just like I'm sure all of you do. And we use our paths feature to space that learning out, and so that they are not overwhelmed by a ton of information all at once. We can give them some information, reinforce it with something like a tip, and then also give them the opportunity to practice, whether that's in a role play or using virtual role play right within our system. So this being able to pull together this path of learning is so important to the transfer of knowledge and getting the behavior change that you want. That I love the example you shared, Jeff, about kind of pulling it all together.
No, thank you. And one of the things I realized in both of our examples, Bryan, is that we're taking, in these last two examples, we're taking existing learning. And I think if you're on the webinar today, you think about, how do you get started with microlearning? You might have a broader program, and just by breaking it up into smaller chunks and serving one piece at a time, you instantly create microlearning. And it's very, I think, easy to find some of the tools to help you do that. So we're coming to this phase in our webinar. We're going to pause for a moment. And I want to remind you, if you have questions for Bryan or myself, then please share them via the chat box. We're going to get to the Q&A portion in just a few minutes. But one of the reasons I invited Bryan to be part of this webinar today is, Lessonly is a fantastic platform for creating learning and creating microlearning. And while I don't think that you need Lessonly to do this, I think Lessonly can make things a lot easier for you. So I want to ask Bryan, if you can, maybe give us a little bit more insight on some different ways that people can use tools like microlearning, people can use Lessonly to create microlearning and make learning more effective.
Absolutely. Thanks, Jeff. So I just wanted to kind of orient you a little bit about us at Lessonly. So like Jeff said, we are a training platform that helps teams build training, deliver it to their customers, deliver it to their employees, and then allow their reps to practice to get the behavior change that they're looking for to improve your businesses. That's how we do it. But if you back up to the Lessonly mission, our mission is that we want to help people do better work so they can lead better lives. Again, training is how we believe, training and enablement is how we believe that we can help our employees do that. So think about the concept of all your reps that you are working with in your contact centers that are servicing your customers. And when they are able to serve your customers to the best of their ability and have the information, have the skills, and are able to develop those, they're able to serve your customers in the best way possible. And when they can do that, they take that happiness that they get from their job home with them. And so while training is the way we are delivering on this mission now, it is something we believe in very, very strongly about how we can actually help our customers do better work. And I'll give you a perfect example of that. One of our customers that we love working with is US Cellular. They're using us across both their retail centers and their contact centers, and they are delivering weekly enablement to their teams on changes in products, changes in processes. They have new phones that are coming out that they are selling their customers or have to be able to support. And they use Lessonly to get that information in the hands of their teams and make sure their teams are able to properly support and sell to their customers. And that has made such an impact on their business because their teams are able to work better, and their management teams, their leaders, are able to coach better because their teams have the information that they need. They're able to get deeper with that information and deeper into their processes. All that has led to amazing CSAT scores. They've increased their CSAT to meet their goals, and they are doing better work at US Cellular, both on the sales and the customer service side. And one thing that we recognize at Lessonly is that this whole process, there's a lot that goes into it. And so one of the things that I wanted to mention to you as well, and Jeff, to your point, I agree with you. Lessonly is one solution. We think we do a really good job of helping our customers, but there are multiple ways you can do things. And what we wanted to do is we put together what we call the Better Work Method. And the Better Work Method is a framework that helps you as a trainer, as a professional, develop training programs that will meet the needs of your customers. So it's a 6-step process that you go through. It is not Lessonly specific at all, but it is a 6-step process that helps you think through the whole process of that program, from assessing what those needs are and finding the gaps, to putting a plan in place, building your content, and then getting it into the hands of your reps so that they can learn what they need, practice immediately so that they have that contextual learning, and then ultimately lead to that performance that's going to lead to them doing better work. And so if you're interested, I would highly encourage you to shoot me an email, connect with me on LinkedIn, just like Jeff has talked about. Like Jeff, I am a geek for learning. I am a geek for helping people create enablement programs that are going to help make their teams better. So I'd love to talk through any of this with you. So Jeff, I think we're about ready for the Q&A. Is that right?
We are. I was just going to say, I think if one thing I'd recommend if you're dialed in today and you'd like to just check out Lessonly and do a demo. Something I would recommend doing, serve up a link here where you can click through and check it out. I think that's the hands-on portion, to be able to play with it a little bit and see what it can do for you is probably a good way to learn more about it. And then our contact information will come up on the screen in just a moment as well. So yeah, Bryan, thank you for that. Here we've got our contact information coming up here on the screen, and we do have a couple of questions. So let's see if we can get to those. One of the it is so Cynthia had a question, I think, which is I think you just addressed a little bit, Bryan, but something we could talk about a little bit more, which is, in addition to the videos, do you still recommend hands-on training? And so I want to give you maybe a couple of pieces of context with this. One, in fact, Bryan, I'm going to go back to your graphic because I think this is a good example here of the better work method. One of the keys here, if you even look at this model, is practice. And so if we think about microlearning, one of the components of microlearning is it has to be immediately useful, which means that at some point for that learning to be complete, it needs to be used. And that's the hands-on component. So with video as an example, the idea is not just the video and then go back to work and do nothing. It's to watch the video with the very specific intent to go back to work and work differently or use that. Now, I know that's probably not exactly how you were asking that question, so I'll broaden it to say, okay, well, what type of training is microlearning? And I'd say anything that fits that definition of it's bite-sized, it's highly relevant, and it's immediately useful. So if it's something, let's say, side by side with a supervisor or even a peer or mentor, if it's working through a problem together, we can consider that microlearning. The one thing I would ask that you consider is, and I've talked to a lot of companies about this, where this is a challenge. If I have to go find a resource to answer a question for me, in that moment, that's a bit of microlearning. But once that question's been answered, what we should do is document that answer in some way, whether it's a video, whether it's a wiki, whether it's a knowledge base, whether it's something, so that the next time me or somebody else has the same question, the answer is immediately accessible. And so I guess that would be another example of microlearning. If you have a knowledge base that you're using, that is also a great example of microlearning. All right, I'm going to put our...
Jeff, if you don't mind, I'd love to chime in with a couple of things here too.
Please.
So I practice, because practice is definitely one of my passions and something that I don't think we do enough of in the business world. But to your point of learning something and then immediately putting it into practice is so important. And I always go back to an example of sports. I'm a big sports fan. I watch a lot of sports, from either the NFL to the MLB to college basketball, whatever it may be. And if you think about in the sports world, if an NFL team is putting in a new play that they want to run on a Sunday, what do? They introduce the new play to the team, they go over it, and then they spend hours practicing it so that they can perform on the field on Sunday and aren't embarrassed, right? So that concept of practice is instilled in sports, it's instilled in art, in the arts, whether that's musical arts or performing arts. It is instilled in our musicians that we go and see at concerts, that they're constantly practicing their craft so that they can do better. But it's something that we don't do a ton of or nearly enough of in the business world. And so that idea of, hey, we have to put it into practice if we really want to get that behavior change and change the way we're doing things.
I love that example of sports, of any team, the idea that you just show up on game day and you're like, I guess we're going to do this now.
Yeah.
It's a little insane.
Yeah, but you say that and it sounds ridiculous. Like, no one would ever do that. But
Right.
we do it to our reps all the time. We're like, hey, here's an email about the process has just changed. Go for it.
Good luck. And now it's, yeah. And meanwhile, that's one of 100 emails that they've received today. And we expect that email to rise up to some level of importance.
Yeah, exactly.
That's going to be tough. So Bryan, I want to encourage everybody who's tuning in, if you have a question about how to get started in microlearning, what constitutes microlearning, best practices, anything that Bryan or I have shared, please use that chat box to share your question. One question I have for you, Bryan, which is, I think this has come up in other conversations around microlearning, is what should we expect in terms of development time? It's one thing to say, oh, that's great that you have this video, or it's great that you have this quick e-learning or whatever it is. But when I'm thinking about, how quickly can I create microlearning? What should people know about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So a couple of things I'd mention here. We have two values within Lessonly that we really try. It's a big part of our culture, and we try to spread to our customers. One is the idea of speed over fidelity. So that's the concept of, sometimes a video can take a lot of production. When you're trying to create a video, you have to think about, all right, how am I going to get this set up? Who's going to edit it? Who's going to be my talent? Do I have to write a script? All those types of things. There's a lot that goes into a video. What we would recommend is, grab your iPhone and set it up and hit record and do something that takes a couple of minutes that you can get into the hands of your team as quickly as possible, because the fidelity that you're going to get from doing a ton of editing and having the perfect setup, it might look nice, but somebody's going to watch that 2-minute video, go put it into practice right away, and then be done with it, right? So we value the ability to get something very quickly into the hands of your people, much more than the fidelity that they get from that. We have one customer in particular. I can't share the name, unfortunately, but they were doing just this. They were spending hundreds of thousands of dollars a year with a studio developing internal training videos. When they switched to Lessonly, we instilled in them this idea of speed over fidelity. And now we talk to our champions there, and they are literally developing training videos using their laptop while they're traveling around, sitting in airports. You can see some of their training videos, and there are people walking behind them in an airport. But the content is still there. The value of the content is still there. They're just not sitting in a studio. So they're recording a 2-minute video sitting on their laptop and getting it immediately into a lesson and out. And I love what they're doing there. The other quick thing I'll share is another one of our values is sharing before you're ready. So it is a very tough concept, but the idea of when you're developing something, especially in microlearning, put a framework in place, put some initial thoughts in place, and immediately get that into the hands of some of your other subject matter experts or some reps who can give you feedback, so that you can get a very tight feedback loop. And that tight feedback loop will help make the creation a lot faster. So using that concept of sharing before you're ready in conjunction with speed over fidelity will make the creation, no matter how you're doing it, whether it's video, developing documents, putting lessons together, no matter what, it's going to make that process much easier and faster.
So, Bryan, I love the idea of kind of getting input from people as you're creating that content. I think we'll probably find that somebody else, often on the front lines, has already solved the problem, and we just need to take that knowledge and share it. And so we actually have I think a question that it's a little parallel to that. John wants to know, and this is great news for you, Bryan, that he says they're in the process of rolling out Lessonly. So hey, kudos. The question from John is how can KCS, so for those of you, let's unbreak that acronym, knowledge centered service or knowledge center support, and Lessonly. So how can KCS and Lessonly and microlearning play out to complement each other?
So just to clarify, KCS, you're talking about kind of your knowledge base. Is that accurate?
It is. That's at a high level, and I appreciate you asking that clarifying question. For people who are, I'll give you the highest level framework on this. The idea is that a lot of what we do is based upon knowledge and information, and as I share with you with the high school locker combination, accessing that knowledge is really difficult. And then, in a larger context, one person might have discovered the answer, but how do you share that answer with everybody? So it is a bit of a process of getting the knowledge that we're using on a daily basis into some form of knowledge base or other tools so that it's easily accessible. So at a highest level, I'd say that's really what knowledge centered support or service is all about.
Yeah, absolutely. So the immediate thing I would think is the way we typically work with a knowledge base or some other tool that you are using to kind of be that at the fingertips tool, like a knowledge base per se, is we think of ourselves as kind of the how. So how do you want having the information at your fingertips is just one step. There's a lot of other things that go into that. For example, you may have an answer, but what is the right way to articulate that answer to an objection to a customer on the phone? So we would recommend putting a practice element in place, a practice scenario in place specific to some of those probably most high profile types of answers, types of information, so that you gain that knowledge, so that they sometimes maybe don't need to go to that knowledge base. A perfect example of that is we work very closely with Zendesk. Zendesk is a really good partner of ours, and we've integrated Lessonly and Zendesk together so that when you have something like a ticket that comes in that is giving your reps challenges, with one button you can hit and it will take that ticket and turn it into a practice scenario within Lessonly. Then you can send out to your team and they can practice that scenario so that they know how to answer it. You would then also want to take that information that you're going to gain from that ticket and put it into that knowledge base so that it is available at the fingertips, but you want to give them the opportunity to practice that so it doesn't become a problem.
I think that's excellent advice, Bryan. And I want to build on that, John, for you and anybody else, even if you're not using Lessonly, one thing I learned the hard way, and then one positive that came out of it, in the past, and we may have done this, we'll sometimes have knowledge in separate places. So in our training system, let's say we're using e-learning, whether it's Lessonly or something else, we might have information that people need, but then we also replicate that information in a live environment in a different tool. And I learned the hard way is you create multiple problems when you do that. One is you have to keep both updated, right? But the second problem is the tool that we're learning or the way we're accessing knowledge and training doesn't really mirror the way we're accessing that same knowledge on the job. So John, one of the things I would suggest to you, if you aren't already doing this, is make sure that, let's say you're using a scenario in Lessonly like Bryan described, or for those of you not using Lessonly, whatever training platform you're using, make sure you're asking your reps to use the live knowledge base to find the right answer to that scenario. Now, here's the cool part, and I'd love to tell you I was some sort of learning genius, but more than 20 years ago, I was faced with the challenge of having to reduce training time. And when you need to do that, you quickly figure out what works and what doesn't. And what I realized accidentally is that by training people on the core skills of, here's how to answer a question, here's how to access the tool, but not training people on the answers to those specific questions, I was able to speed up training by 50% and improve performance. Because here's what happened. In the past, people had to memorize the answer to all the most common questions. And if not, bring the service interaction to a screeching halt while they went and found somebody. Now, what people learned was, here's the basic framework for serving our customers. And then no matter what challenge I threw at them, as long as the answer was available in the knowledge base, they would quickly real time find the answer and seamlessly share the required information with the customer and solve their problem. So I spent less time in training getting people to memorize stuff and more time just helping them use that knowledge base to perform at a higher level. So that applies, John, I think, to you, but anybody else, even if you're not using a tool like Lessonly, getting your agents to learn how to solve problems and then having a knowledge base of some kind where those answers reside, every time you're dealing with a problem, looking up that knowledge base article, that's microlearning. So awesome question, John. I really appreciate that. All right, Bryan, I get good news for us and maybe our webinar participants. I don't see any other questions. Our contact information is up here, so people can reach out to us. Before we close up our webinar today, Bryan, I'll put you on the spot. Any final parting words of wisdom?
Yeah, I would just say, one, thank you for having me on. I could talk about this micro learning and just learning and training all day long. So I appreciate you having me. The last thing I would say is, if you are working to build out your programs right now, think about taking a look at our Better Work method. Like I said, it doesn't matter if you're using Lessonly, another tool, or no tool. The process that we put together, working with 700 customers, a couple million users over the course of the last few years, is really a great path that you can use to make sure you're looking holistically at your program. So go check it out. If you have questions, please hit me up.
Thank you, Bryan. And I really appreciate you being a part of the webinar today. Such awesome examples. And I think one of the things that you did very nicely is make things very practical and easy. So for everybody who's on the webinar, thank you as well. I hope you don't mind. We finished a little bit early. A couple hours from now, you'll get an email with a link to the video replay. So we're going to give you a little more micro learning there. You don't have to watch the whole video. You just fast forward to a section where maybe we covered something that was interesting and helpful to you. And it also makes it easy to share this with people that perhaps weren't able to make it today. So thank you so much, everybody. Happy holidays to you. And one last thing I did want to share is coming up in the new year. I'm going to share the link in the chat box. I've got another webinar for you that I'm really excited about. The CEO of Thematic coming in to be a part of this webinar. We're going to talk about how to use your unstructured customer feedback data to generate insights and actually get a return on investment on that program. So that's going to be a lot of fun. So thanks again, Bryan, for being here. Thanks to all of you for being on the webinar, and maybe we'll see you at the next one.
Awesome. Thanks, Jeff.